I grew up in a single-parent household. Just me, my sister, and my mom, with my grandpa occasionally lending a hand with parenting duties. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, we were broken into twice. I didn't know all the details of the whole thing until years later. I have vague memories of moving apartments and some cops coming over to the house, but I was pretty much kept in the dark until I was old enough to handle what had gone down. For the first break-in, we were all out grocery shopping, so my mom didn't realize anything had happened until we got home. There was an open window, open drawers. The way my grandpa tells it, it's like my mom interrupted them in the middle of doing something, and they climbed out of a second-floor window as soon as he'd heard us arrive. That or whoever it was just didn't care about people knowing he'd been there. The second break-in happened 3 months later. Only this time, the guy broke in at nighttime while we were all asleep. I had to get all this from my grandpa because, understandably, my mom hates talking about it. But the way he tells it, she basically woke up in the middle of the night and sensed a presence in the room with her. Not like a spirit or anything dumb like that, like an actual person. Then when she opened her eyes, there was someone standing next to her bed with something shiny in his hand. She told Grandpa she was literally frozen with terror, couldn't move, couldn't talk, literally petrified in the very sense of the word. Apparently, the guy was mumbling something. Mom couldn't remember exactly what. Then by the time she started begging him not to hurt her, she couldn't hear anything at all. My sister remembers walking into her room, thinking that she was having a nightmare. She asked Mom if she was okay. Mom threw the covers from over her head, saw the guy was gone, then noticed the second-floor window was open where the guy had used the same escape route as the first break-in. She put my little sister back to bed. I obviously have no memory of this because I was asleep. She called 911. Then she called my grandpa. Grandpa said the cops found faint, muddy footprints all over the house, including in our bedrooms, so he'd obviously taken his time exploring the place before he'd woken my mom up. Only this guy hadn't just been exploring. He'd been very, very busy, and it actually took us a few days to uncover all the bizarre little things he'd done. Things which spoke to just how insane this person really was. The next day, when we noticed that the cat wouldn't touch her milk, Mom poured it out into the sink, thinking that it had gone sour, then got the distinct smell of bleach as she did so. She can't be certain, but she thinks the guy poured bleach into the cat's milk, wanting to kill it. Then there was the cracked empty eggs in the fridge, not like cracked all the way, just little holes in the top with all the yolk and egg white missing. It's possible he just poured them down the sink, but Grandpa thinks the guy might have been sucking them raw. Not all that scary, I know, just freaky, you know. Mom says some meat was missing from the fridge too, raw meat, but I know Grandpa used to feed our cat from the fridge too, so we can't rule that out. A few days later, Grandpa came over in the evening for some dinner and offered to help prep for garbage day. He says one of the garbage cans is split right as he got into the driveway. Complains to my mom about tin cans in the garbage or whatever, and then goes on the cleanup and finds what spilt it. Someone, presumably the guy who broke in, had thrown a pair of scissors in the trash, along with a clothing catalog he'd been cutting up. He cut the heads off almost every single model in that catalog, and the little paper heads were nowhere to be found. My grandpa thinks the guy took them as some kind of trophy, but who knows what he really did with them. Then there was the salt in my mom's work shoes, the knife missing from her knife block in the kitchen. Obviously, the shiny thing he'd been holding when she woke up to him in her room. Anyway, the cops got plenty of fingerprints, but whoever it was didn't have a record, and other than the muddy boot prints they found, There was nothing much to go on. So to this day, no one's been arrested for it. But my grandpa thinks he knows who it was. Years later, after we moved apartments twice in a bid to avoid the guy, a friend of a distant relative ended up getting locked up in some kind of psychiatric hospital. The guy had become obsessed with Alice in Wonderland, had all the books, multiple copies of them too, and all he ever talked about was the Looking Glass or Wonderland and all this stuff. It might just be a complete coincidence, but the thing is, that's my mom's name, Alice. She's over the whole thing now. It's been more than 20 years since all of that, but I know that if she doesn't like talking about it even today, it had to have messed her up for a while. Story 2. I'm 21 years old, a girl in college. This started when I was 20 at the beginning of 2018 to be exact. It was about 2:00 a.m., and I had just gone downstairs to get a midnight snack. I sat down at the kitchen island after making myself a plate of nachos and turned on some YouTube, as I always do. After about 20 minutes of this, I was in the process of choosing my next video when I got the sudden urge to look towards the living room. As I did, a large, dark, black figure seemingly floated past the hallway towards the front door area. Its head almost skimmed the ceiling, making it over 7 feet tall. It resembled the Grim Reaper, wearing a hooded cloak that went the length of its body down to the floor. But it wasn't carrying any type of scythe or weapon, not that I could see. Most people would have been freaked out, would have been scared at least. But to be honest, the only thing that went through my head was, whoa, that happened. Then I went back to eating and watching my video. I've seen enough horror films to come to this conclusion. The second you want to snitch about something, that's when you get trapped in your house or mysteriously killed. So I wasn't going to say anything out loud or bring it up to anyone, or even show any signs that I acknowledged it. Fast forward a couple of weeks later. There's no more activity for now. At around 6:00 one evening, though, I was home alone. Both parents were on work-related trips. I was lying on my stomach in my bed, playing some game on my phone. There was no music for the game, as I had my phone on silent. That's when I heard it, as clear as day, coming just from the other side of my closed bedroom door, a very demonic male voice. I froze for a moment. I could clearly tell that not only did the voice come from the other side of the door, but whatever called out my name was bent down and spoke right through the gap in the bottom. The same thought went through my head again. Just ignore it, and it won't do anything to you. I went back to playing my game, quickly forgetting that it even happened, until something a little bit more creepy started happening. It had been a month or two since the previous incident, and I had completely forgotten about the thing I started calling Shadow Demon. I woke up on a lazy Saturday morning. I was too lazy to actually open my eyes all the way and get up, so I stayed in bed, curled up in my blankets, listening to my music still playing on my phone from the night before. My eyes were closed, and I hadn't moved from my original waking position, lying completely still. I suddenly felt the corner of my bed being pushed in, like someone had placed their hand there, and began testing the firmness and bounciness of the bed. I immediately thought, he is back, so I laid totally still, not wanting to let it know that I was awake. And after a couple of minutes, my bed sunk down like someone had sat down on it. Now, I was actually kind of freaked out. This thing was watching me, supposedly sleep. What kind of creep does that? I thought, honestly trying to make myself feel better and more calm about the situation. After about 10 minutes, the weight finally lifted. This actually happened every morning for the next week or two. What really creeped me out, though, was that on the mornings where I didn't think it happened, I realized it probably did. and I had just slept through it. When it all died down again, nothing happened for another couple of months. I knew he came back, especially when he started sitting on the bed again. Only this time, he seemed like he was trying to wake me up by bouncing on the bed more violently. I stayed completely still again, just waiting for it to stop and go away so I could go out and get some food. The creepiness of it all had waned a bit. Fast forward, now in 2019, around late May, he'd stopped again for a few months. Then he came back suddenly with a bang. I was laying in bed, minding my own business, and watching Netflix on the computer when something slapped the end of my bed extremely hard. It scared the heck out of me, and I almost smacked my phone off the bed in fright. I figured it was that shadow demon, so I ignored it and pretended it didn't even happen. I'm probably being stupid at this point, but I don't care. A week goes by, and I'm disturbed again. This time, something bumped itself against the bottom of my bed, as if there was something alive underneath it. Honestly, I tried not to chuckle at the thought of a huge demon accidentally smacking its head against a bed frame. Not much more has happened since then, except for my cat taking an odd liking to one corner of my room. The corner where, at one point, I swear to God, I saw something inhuman standing there, watching me. But that's the end of it for now. When things do happen, it's random. Some of it's creepy, and some of it unused. Story 3. So, I've had quite a few bad experiences with strange people in my house from when I was young. An old man would come banging on our door late at night, demanding to see me, causing me to have to hide in the house. Or once, when a man came knocking on our door late at night with a knife, because he mistook our house for my neighbor's. These experiences all caused me to be very cautious about opening the front door to anyone, or even being in the house alone, especially at night. But one evening was definitely the worst. It was around 6:00 p.m. in November of 2018. I'm from England, meaning it was already pitch black outside at this time of the year. I had just gotten home from work and was sitting in my room upstairs, watching YouTube on my laptop. My mom shouted up to me that she was just going to pick my brother up from work and would be stopping off at the gas station on the way back, so she would be gone for a little bit. She asked if I'd wanted to come. I said no, and I carried on with my video. I heard her close the front door and pull out of the driveway. I was 17 at the time, so being home alone at night was nothing new to me, and I was used to the eerie feeling of it. But after around 10 minutes, I started hearing noises coming from downstairs. At first, I thought nothing of it, and just related it to my cat noisily searching for food in an empty bowl, until I remembered him sitting at the end of my bed. I paused my video and listened more, at the sound of banging on my back door. This instantly creeped me out, until it was followed by the sound of keys dangling. I thought, oh, my mom must have dropped my brother off before going to the station, and he's just trying to go outside. So I let the noise continue as I kept watching my video. He can get quite angry at times, so the loud banging was nothing out of the ordinary. But it just kept carrying on, banging, the sounds of keys dangling, then dropping, then banging again. Then the fear really hit me. I don't think it's him. I walked out of my room slowly and sat on the stairs, listening carefully to the noise. It definitely wasn't him. I'm an extremely anxious person, and everyone gets those late night moments when they hear noises and immediately think the worst. This was just one of those, I told myself. So I decided to bite the bullet and just walk straight into the kitchen and face whatever it was that was causing the noise. Our kitchen has the door facing straight to the garden, But as I turned the corner into the kitchen, I heard a loud bang and the clatter of footsteps running away. The cat flap had been ripped off the door, and there was plastic from it everywhere. In fear, I still tried to console myself into thinking it could have been anything other than people breaking in. I sat back on the stairs and called my mom just to check again that it wasn't my brother home early and just in a bad mood. But then he answered my mom's phone while still in the car. "Are you home?" I shouted at him. Then my voice started to break with terror. "Please be serious. Are you home right now?" I asked. "No. What do you want?" he said. Even though he said he wasn't, I still begged in my mind that he was joking just to scare me. But he heard how scared I was and began to worry. I explained to him what happened, and he started to scream at me to call the police. He's never been a protective type, but I could tell now he was really worried, and told my mom to rush back home straight away while calling for the police. I tried so hard to stay calm. I told them exactly what was happening as I hid back in my room with the door tightly locked. Then I heard talking and the banging of doors downstairs again. They were back. I burst into tears to the dispatcher out of pure fear, and I sat on the phone for what felt like forever until my mom, brother, and police all pulled up at the same time. Everyone charged through the house to the back door, and we instantly saw what they had done. The people saw the keys to the back door on the side in the kitchen, took a broom from outside, broke it in half on the door handle, got the broom through the cat flap, knocked the keys off the side, and pulled them through the cat flap. Although out of pure luck as they broke the broom in half, they also managed to snap off the door handle, making it completely impossible for it to be opened from the outside. Otherwise, they would have gotten in, no questions asked, and I would have been sitting quietly in my room, completely oblivious. It was clear afterward that they had been watching the house for a while, waiting until the exact moment that they saw my mom's car pull out of the drive. I'm not sure if they knew I was there alone or not, but I know that after they actually saw me and ran away, they made a choice to come back. Story 4. This happened several years ago when I lived with my ex-boyfriend. We had been living there for roughly 1 month when. This event occurred several years ago when I lived with my ex-boyfriend. We had been living there for roughly 1 month when this event occurred. My ex was out with work colleagues, and I was home alone. I spent the early evening watching TV and eating takeout. A couple of times, I heard some strange noises, but whenever I would try to zone in on them to figure out what it was, it seemed like it would stop. It got later into the night, and I decided to go upstairs and use a computer for a little while before heading to bed. At this point in time, we hadn't had our phone line installed, and I was still on a pay-as-you-go phone which had run out of credit. I basically had no way to communicate with anyone while I was in the house for the night. So I'm sitting in the bedroom with only a small table lamp on that barely fanned a glow while I'm typing away on my laptop when I started to hear weird noises again. It started as a light rattling noise, very faint to the point where I had to strain to hear if I was really hearing it or imagining it. I shut my music off and tried to figure out what it was. I went into our bedroom and looked down to the front door, but nobody is there. We had a small yard with a high brick wall and a solid wooden gate with nothing to cast any light. But from what little I could see, there was nothing out back either. I sat back down and switched the music back on. I would say about 10 minutes later, I hear this very eerie screeching sound like metal on metal, again very faint, as if whatever was making it was trying desperately to be quiet. I was getting more than a little freaked out by this point, so I went into our bedroom to retrieve this heavy iron rod that we found in the back of the built-in wardrobe. I didn't switch on any lights as I didn't know what was going on. I didn't want to alert any possible intruder to my location inside the house. Remember, I had no way of calling anyone, and I was getting more than a little concerned that someone might actually be in my house. I headed into the bathroom to see if I could get a better look into the alley that the house backed onto. The office and bedroom, and the bathroom formed an L around the yard, with the bathroom extending further out. I climbed up onto the ledge and inched the window open, trying to see out into the alley. I couldn't see a thing, but the whispering was louder and coming from directly behind my gate. I couldn't hear whole sentences, but I heard enough to summarize whoever these men were, and that they'd seen us move in and had seen we had quite a lot of valuable equipment like guitars, computers, my DSR TV, game consoles, etc. I imagined they had seen I was home alone, and they were waiting for me to go to sleep to try to get into the house. I stayed perched there for what felt like an eternity, until what seemed like the loudest thud in the world echoed up to me. I guess they grew tired of trying to be stealthy, and one or both of them were throwing themselves at my gate, trying to break it down. I could see it shuddering under the blows, and could only imagine how large these men must be. I'm a tiny person, all of a whole 5'3", and at that point, I probably weighed somewhere around 115 elves. As you can imagine, I was white with terror as I watched my gate groan under the stress. I sat clutching that iron rod, just trying to think where I could hide from them. Suddenly, a glaring light blinded me. At first, I panicked and dropped out of sight, thinking they were shining a flashlight at the back of the house. But then I heard barking and shouting. I peeked out again, and I saw the house, which was across the alley from us, had a floodlight installed, and it was illuminating both their own yard, mine, and the alleyway with light. I heard grumbling and cursing, and then 2 sets of footsteps hurrying down the alley. I stayed locked in that bedroom until my ex-boyfriend drunkenly rolled in at about 4 a.m. I didn't sleep a wink that night, and when I went into the yard in the morning, my gate was hanging by one hinge, allowing easy access from the alley. When I looked at the back of it, the keyhole was covered in scratches. Story 5. This happened well over 10 years ago, so I will try my best to describe the events accurately. One of my childhood homes had a balcony attached to both my mother's bedroom and mine via big double glass doors in each one of our rooms. Next to the balcony are 2 trees. One I used often climb up and down from the balcony. This balcony faced out to the street. I was a 13-year-old girl at the time of this story. One night when my brother and mother weren't home, I was reading in bed with a very dim reading light. I heard what sounded like something moving in one of the trees outside, but this didn't worry me as possums and bats are common in our area. Now, I had thin curtains covering the glass doors that separated my room and the balcony. As mentioned previously, the doors faced out towards the street where a street lamp light was almost always visible through my curtains. Shortly after hearing the tree rustling noises, I saw a shadow slowly move past the doors, at which point I immediately turned off my reading light and froze like a deer in headlights. The shadow was tall, so it wasn't one of the neighbor kids that I'm friends with, and it wasn't my 5-foot mother. The person moved slowly, creeping as though they were trying not to be noticed. They wouldn't likely be able to see into my room, but I could see them thanks to the street lights behind them, creating a dark silhouette. They moved past my doors out of sight, and I sat there unable to move or even think about what to do other than be absolutely still. That is until I heard another sound. The sound of someone trying to open one of the glass doors, my mom's door to the balcony. I didn't know if she had locked them or not, but I wasn't taking any chances. I moved as quickly and as silently as I could to the bedroom door and locked it. I listened for what the person was doing now, and they were still jiggling the glass door handle, but it sounded like the doors weren't opening. I felt relief, like this person couldn't get in. Surely, all I had to do was wait for them to realize that, and then they would leave, right? Well, I heard light footsteps move back along the balcony to my set of glass doors, until I saw his shadow stop directly in front of them again. I froze, knowing he couldn't see me. He didn't know I could see him, though. I saw a shadow of a hand reach up to my door handle, and my heart stopped. Had I actually locked those doors myself today? I mean, I was out there earlier. What if I forgot? Seconds leading up to him grabbing the handle felt like an eternity. But thankfully, when this person tried to open the door, it did not open. It was locked. I sighed such a sigh of relief. I was worried he had heard it. After this, he began pacing the length of the balcony. I didn't have a mobile phone as my mom thought I was too young to have one yet, and the landline was at the other end of the house. I was too scared to take my eyes off of this person, even to call for help. I was silently crying, with tears falling down my cheeks as I internally prayed that they would just leave. Then I heard him stop moving. He then said, "I could just break the glass, you know." Before I could even process this, I saw car headlights turn around the corner of my street and then stop at our property gate. My mom was home. The person on the balcony moved out of sight, and I heard a loud thump as they jumped off of it. When my mom came inside, I was hysterical, and I was barely coherent in telling her what happened. Eventually, I got the message across, and she called the police. Here is the text formatted and edited for grammar without changing the content. They never found or caught anyone, but a neighbor reported a truck in the street that matched the description of a truck that had been reported recently for attempted child abductions near my school a block away. Since I walked that short distance daily, the police suspected that he had followed me or seen that I lived there and waited for me to be alone. Story 6. Some years ago, I lived in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. It's right on the ocean, and it's quite beautiful. There are a lot of bars and places to explore, and the people are very friendly. St. John's has lots of stories, and a long history. There are ghost stories about people who came back as ghosts after shipwrecks, and there are spooky stories of vampires too. You name it. One story everyone tells you about is something called hagging. Apparently, visitors to Newfoundland often experience what is known as hagging, which involves someone falling asleep and waking up with the apparition of someone, usually a demented old woman, on your chest, and the victim cannot move, a phenomenon common with sleep paralysis. Victims, of course, when I heard about it, that's all I thought it was, just sleep paralysis. I mean, what else could it be? After all, sleep paralysis involves not being able to move and often comes with hallucinations. It fit perfectly. That's not it at all. My friends would tell me it's really something different, and I would usually roll my eyes and ignore them. But my assumption was dead wrong. One night, I was going through my usual ritual. I fed the cat, tidied up the house, and made sure the doors were locked. I always did that last, without fail, because there was an old woman in our neighborhood who would sometimes walk around at night yelling. She was harmless, but she was obviously quite ill, and the last thing I wanted was for her to get inside, especially as I lived alone. So I was always very careful about keeping both sets of doors locked. I had 2 sets of doors, in fact. You entered through one set of doors into a mudroom, and then you needed another key to get in through the second set of doors. The second set had a deadbolt, which I always slid into place. So I locked up and read my book, and I began to fall asleep. But in the middle of the night, something woke me up. I know I was awake as I am now typing this. The moonlight from the window shone through, and in between the window and my bed, I could make out a tall man with a wide-brimmed hat. He was just standing there, and he was mostly in shadow. I could see his details, such as the white cuffs of the shirt and his long hands. I lay there, staring at him. I could even see him breathing in and out. Then, between one blink of my eyes and the next, he disappeared, just like that. He was there 1 second, then gone the next. I shot up from my bed and ran downstairs, only to find both sets of my doors were now unlocked, even though I had just locked them. The deadbolt, though, oddly enough, was still in place. None of it made sense, and I stared at the doors for a long time, almost hyperventilating. If someone broke in and got back out, they wouldn't be able to close the deadbolt inside the house and just get out. I grabbed a baseball bat and turned on all the lights, doing a check of the house, room by room. I even checked the closets. There was no person in the house except for me, of course, but I almost screamed when I walked into the bathroom. My bathroom cabinet, which always faced me, now had the mirror facing toward the shelves. To do that, someone would have to unscrew the mirror from the hinges and rearrange the mirror toward the shelves. I went into my living room and started to sweat. The mirror above my mantelpiece, the heavy mirror that had been there when I moved in, was now turned around so that the glass faced the wall. The top of the mirror was near the ceiling. There's no way someone could heave that heavy mirror into place without a ladder, let alone without making a sound that I would notice. Again, nothing made sense, but I kept trying to make sense of it somehow. I checked all the windows, but they were closed, and they were the kind of windows that roll outward. They can't be opened from the outside, unless you break the glass to access the handle, and none of the glass was broken. I didn't call the cops about this. What would I have said? Literally nothing else in my house other than the mirrors were disturbed. Nothing was taken. Instead, I called a local handyman to come and fix my mirrors. He didn't ask questions, though he noted that the mirror was way too heavy for one person to lift. So we had to call in another helper to bring a ladder and to help him turn the mirror back around. I paid him extra, and I thanked him for helping me so promptly. Nothing else strange happened to me in that house, but I never called hagging sleep paralysis again. What I experienced can't be explained away by someone pranking me, or a sleep disorder, or anything else that I can even make sense of. I moved away from St. John's a year after that. I've not had any other disturbances while sleeping, but I never did figure out what that thing in my bedroom was. Story 7. I was 14 years old. I was in softball, and I had just got a new bat and a bat bag to start using. Back then, I used to leave the window unlocked in case one of my friends or my boyfriend wanted to leave me a note. I never locked it, and I never really had a reason to worry about unlocking it until that day. It was 7 p.m. My parents and my sister were out getting something at the store and were to be gone for hours. I was sitting downstairs, watching TV, when I decided to pack my new bat bag. When I was almost finished, I realized I had left my new bat upstairs, and I wanted to pack it so I would not forget it tomorrow. I ran upstairs to my room and grabbed my bat, and as I turned to leave, I heard something. I turned, and I froze. My heart stopped when I saw a man I did not recognize, crawling through my unlocked window. I watched him as he made it into the middle of my room. He reached out for me. I remembered the softball bat in my hand. I closed my eyes and swung as hard as I could. I heard a deafening crack, and then I heard him tumble to the ground. When I opened my eyes, He appeared to be unconscious. I bolted out of my room and down the stairs, twisting my ankle along the way. I dialed 911 as I could, telling the operator what happened. Me being stupid, I hobbled upstairs to check if the man was out cold and to grab my ankle brace. But when I arrived, my room was empty and the window was wide open. When the police arrived, I gave them a brief description of the man. I never got any updates as to whether or not they found him. I got in trouble for unlocking my window, and now I leave it locked, and it's going to stay that way from now on. I'm 16 now, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. If you take anything away from this, remember, lock your windows, and it doesn't hurt to have a baseball bat in your room. Story 8. I'm a 29-year-old guy who lives alone. I live in a 3-story, 3-bedroom house. It's my childhood home that I inherited through some upsetting circumstances. It's just me, my pit bull bear, and a house that is far from necessary for what we need. I choose to live alone because I'm a solitary individual. Plus, with the life insurance and inheritance I receive, I can live alone comfortably. With that being said, I'm a chef by profession. I work long hours and come home late at night. My brother has a key to the house, but only to let Bear out and to make sure he has food and water if I'm working too late or out of town. You might be thinking, why not have my brother move in? Well, way back in the day when my parents divorced, he went with my mom, and I stayed with my dad. Anyway, my story begins with one of those long nights I spoke of. I informed my brother that I'd be working late and to take care of Bear. He obliged, and all was right. I ended up getting home around 1 o'clock, since the kitchen closes at 12:30, and we had a lot of cleanup to do. I got home, and Bear was there to greet me as usual, happy that I was home. I cooked a quick dinner and headed upstairs to go to bed. Now, when I close down the restaurant, and I know I have to work the next day, I always hang my chef's coat on top of the banister leading up the stairs. This way, when I get up and get ready to leave, I can easily grab it and get going. So, as Bear followed me up the stairs, I placed my coat on the banister. A normal night in, I began drinking because I felt like it. But all the beer was in the fridge in the kitchen. The kitchen being on the 2nd floor, and my room on the 3rd. I went ahead and grabbed 4 beers so that I didn't have to go back. I went back to my room and let Bear in. He soon fell asleep on my floor as I drank, and watched random YouTube videos of unsolved mysteries and things like that. Once the 4 beers were gone, I kept taking trips back to the fridge, even though I had planned against it. I would just step over Bear and leave the room to get more beer. As I began to become mildly intoxicated, my coat hanging off the banister would startle me when I walked out. Mind you, all the lights in the house are off. I would head up the stairs and see something and be scared for a second, then snap back to reality. This was commonplace, but alcohol makes you forget reality. I would take the second of being scared, and then laugh at my own stupidity. It's your coat, dummy. You know this. Why are you so jumpy? I would tell myself. Well, around the end of my 7th beer, I noticed I needed a new one. So I stepped over Bear and headed downstairs. I got my beer and began to ascend back to my room. I'd have made a mental note not to be scared of seeing my coat again at the top of the stairs. Only this time, my coat was not there. I froze. Fear and confusion crippled me. But I thought because I left my door open, Bear got up to look for me and accidentally knocked it down. Then maybe he realized that I would be coming back and went to sleep. I climbed the stairs, and my coat wasn't there. I entered my room, and Bear was sound asleep, but no coat. I had turned on the hallway light, and it wasn't in the hall. At this point, I was on edge. I did one more sweep of the hall and didn't see it. Terrified, I closed my door and locked it, blaming my thought process on the alcohol. Hours after that, I managed to fall asleep. The following day, I had work again. That's why I put my coat on the banister in the first place. So before I left, I needed to find the thing. I searched high and low, but nothing. Then I realized the only place I hadn't looked was my dad's bedroom. I kept the door closed after his passing. I didn't want to go in there. That's the only place it could be, though. So I opened the door for the first time since his passing, and on his bed, neatly folded, mind you, was my coat, ready for me to take. My blood ran cold, and chills flooded over my spine. I couldn't believe it. Did my dad do this? Did something else do this? My house has a security alarm, so I would have known if anyone broke in. So it was just me and Bear. That was only the most recent occurrence. The other one that made me feel this way happened years before, while my dad was still alive. I used to work as an overnight manager at McDonald's. My shift was 10 o'clock p.m. until 6 o'clock a.m., so I would sleep during the day and wake up around 8 o'clock p.m. to get ready. My dad would work nights and was not home until I was getting ready to leave. One summer day, I was sleeping because I had work. I was awakened by Bear barking his head off. I'll preface this by saying, Bear is a rescue dog. He was used in pit bull fighting. So with that, my dog hates other dogs and will only bark when he sees one through the giant front room windows. When his barking woke me up, I figured it was just that. I shouted at him to shut up, which normally does the trick. But this time, he didn't stop. So I had to get up and go to find him. Once you leave my room, you're in the hall and are immediately facing the staircase that looks directly into the front room. He wasn't at the windows. He was still barking, however. As I stood at the top of the stairs, I had to find him and see what was wrong, all while shouting at him to stop. Once you go down the first flight of stairs, you take a left, and you're in the kitchen. That's where I found him. He was sitting at the top of the stairs that take you to the basement, ears standing straight up, along with all the fur on his body. I was annoyed he woke me up, so I shouted, "What are you barking at, you stupid dog?" That's when I peered into the basement. Against the fireplace was a shadowed figure, which is the only way I can describe it. It was probably 7 feet tall, but definitely the shadow of a man. I froze. Then, when my senses came back, I shouted at the man, "You better get the hell out of my house." I ran to the kitchen drawers and grabbed the biggest knife I could find. When I looked back in the basement, I caught the shadow moving into the laundry room. There's a back door in that room, so I ran down the stairs, ready to defend myself from someone. But no one was there. The back door, in fact, was still dead-bolted, and the handle was locked. I was alone in my house, as I had been this whole time. Apparently, the dog and I both saw what was in my house that night. He alerted me to its presence like a good dog. For the first incident mentioned, I continued to live alone here, but I know it's not just the dog and I that live in this house. All of these events spread out across a year, but some of them are ongoing. Story 9. I've only ever told 2 people this story, mainly because I'm scared to, but also because I'm sort of complicit in the whole thing. Sometimes I feel that if I wasn't so cowardly, I'd have just gone to the police, and the whole ordeal would have been over in less than 24 hours. But that's obviously not what happened, or I wouldn't even be writing this. By November of last year, The whole lockdown thing had me pretty miserable. I hated being stuck in some crummy little apartment. But after a while, I realized this wasn't so much because I hated being stuck indoors. It was more that I just hated the apartment I was living in. So, despite it being a terrible time to pack up and move apartments, I decided to look for a new place. I found a place I liked surprisingly quickly, and after a thorough virtual viewing that took place over FaceTime, I offered to put down a deposit. The landlady said I could move in on the first day of December, less than a week from the time I was calling her, and that they were just finishing off a few repairs. It sounded totally legitimate. The lady seemed cool. But when it came to me asking for the contact info of the former tenant, just to get an idea of what I was in for, she told me she didn't have any contact details for him. I was like, what? Well, how did you keep in touch with the guy? She got all flustered and gave me some excuses about having a new phone, which I stupidly swallowed whole because I wanted the apartment so badly. Then, like we agreed, I moved in on the 1st of December, cut to the second week in the apartment. Everything is going awesomely. Electric bills were kinda high, but otherwise, nothing to complain about. Then one night, I'm literally just getting out of the shower when there's a knock at the door. I towel off a little, throw on a robe, walk to the door, and take a look through the peephole. No one. I see absolutely no one at all. Stupidly, I then open the door and look out into the hallway. And the next thing I know, there's a gun in my face, and holding it is a dude in a coveted mask. He and his buddies forced me back into the apartment, and the whole time, like, just take what you want. No one has to get hurt here. I'm cool if you're cool. But the weirdest thing happens. While one of the dudes keeps his gun on me, another one of them walks straight into my bedroom, almost like he knew exactly what he was looking for. One of his buddies follows, and I see this big old sledgehammer in his hand. I start asking what's going on, but the guy with a gun cuts me off and tells me to shut up. So I did. The front door is shut at this point. No one can see what's going on. No one's coming to help me, so I'm scared, but I'm also pretty curious too. That's when I hear these banging sounds coming from the bedroom, sounding exactly like one of them was demolishing some drywall. And as it turns out, that's exactly what they were doing. I hear a few more bangs before one of the guys shouts, "Yeah, boy, there it is, just like you said." The next thing I know, the guys are reappearing with a dusty sports bag in their hands. He unzips it and just sees rolls and rolls of dirty-looking dollar bills. Like there had to be at least $500,000 there, at least. The guy takes one of the rolls out, drops it on the floor in front of me, then says something like, "Get your wall fixed up, bruh, and keep the change. But don't tell no one we've been here, otherwise, we come back for you." I just nod. Then they'd walk out, still wearing their masks, looking as nonchalant as can be. I was shaking way harder than I'm comfortable admitting. Let's just leave it at that. But when I picked up the roll of dirty hundreds and counted them out, there was $10,000 just staring me in the face. If you've never had that kind of cash money on you, it makes you nervous. But I knew I'd be spending it pretty fast on getting my drywall fixed up, as well as other home improvements. The first being the big deadbolt on my apartment door. Story 10. Back when I was locked up, I read a pamphlet on creative writing. I remember how it said you have to create sympathy between the reader and the subject. If the reader doesn't somehow like the person they're reading about, if they can't find any redeemable qualities, they won't root for them to succeed. And here's where my story is going to fall down. You see, I am not a nice guy. At least I wasn't, because back in the day, I was a career criminal, one who specialized in burglaries, armed robberies, and most pertinent to this story, home invasions. Violent home invasions can be ridiculously profitable, and compared to banks, offices, or warehouse spaces, security is minimal. What's more, me and my firm worked here in England, so it's not like we had some pesky Second Amendment to deal with. Yeah, you still had to worry about have-a-go heroes with their baseball bats and kitchen knives. And I can tell you from personal experience that bread knives leave horrific scars. But unless you were deft enough to target some rich farmer, you could be safe in the knowledge you wouldn't be bringing a knife to a gunfight. On top of that, we carved out a very specific niche when it came to who we targeted, because the people we go for were either those with no legal recourse, drug dealers, loan sharks, dodgy builders firms, anyone who'd have a lot of dirty cash on hand, or anything valuable they wouldn't be able to report stolen. But please, don't get it into your heads that I was some weird Robin Hood vigilant, robbing the filthy rich and giving it away. Yeah, we went after heroin and crack dealers, but we got them at home where their families slept. We threatened their kids. Little kids, man. We put knives to their arms and legs, told their dads we'd chop them up into little pieces if they didn't give up the cash, or the coke, or whatever we were after. Like I said, we were top scumbags. But here's where the incentive to read on comes in, because I'm sure many of you will be pleased to hear that we got what was coming to us. In fact, I might not live to see 2022, and to explain why, we have to go all the way back to around early April 2015, when a very exciting bit of information made its way through the grapevine to us. So, our little firm had 4 blokes in it. Me, who did the lion's share of the planning. Kev, the driver. Scene, who was basically the muscle that definitely had his head screwed on too. And Phil, who brought in the jobs, and who was the closest thing we had to a leader. Phil comes down to the pub one day, and we can tell right away he's got something on his mind. He's all smiles, just orders a Red Bull. And when he sits down in the booth, he's practically rubbing his hands with glee. He then tells us that he had a mate that drove minicabs for a living. And over the previous month, he got in 5 different jobs driving these gorgeous young Eastern European girls out to this big house in Surrey. Clandon Park House, he said its name was. The kind of place you'd call a stately home if it was under the care of the National Trust. But this one wasn't. It was still very much under private ownership, and whoever that owner was seemed to be in the business of bringing some very beautiful but very vulnerable young women there. Only they never seemed to leave. As this minicab driver said, he never once drove anyone back. He dropped them off, but no one, not from his cab for him anyway, went back to pick them up. This really made our ears perk up. Human trafficking rings don't normally keep a lot of cash on hand, as it's all digital these days. But if one was based in some old big mansion type thing, there had to be some stuff in there with a very high resale value, if you catch my drift. Phil then told us that he'd asked his mate to keep an ear on the ground, basically to make sure something dodgy wasn't going on before we hit the place, but otherwise told us to be on standby for what could be our biggest job yet. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, we get 2 more pieces of info down the tube. Whatever was going on at Clandon Park was definitely something dodgy. The minicab driver had made 2 more trips there over the past few weeks. One of the girls he gave a lift to was definitely a working girl. You'd think this would be the green light for us. If we hit the place around the same time as one of these little visits, the bloke might think it was linked to the girl. Maybe the gang running her wanting more than they were owed, and we'd potentially be off the hook. But the second bit of info came with a warning. The minicab driver didn't think we should go ahead with the job. And this is why. The second time he drove a girl up, she hadn't been nearly as excited as the rest of them. He'd said in the past, the girls knew they were in for a payday being driven out to a big posh house in the middle of nowhere. Maybe she'd get a tidy tip or something. Maybe pinch a set of diamond earrings. Maybe a bit of both. But the last one seemed different. When she got into the minicab, she didn't seem happy or excited. She seemed very, very anxious. When the driver tried to make small talk, she wasn't having any of it. Then at one point, right as they're doing about 60 miles an hour on a busy motorway, she undoes her belt, opens the back door, and just throws herself out of the car. He phones the ambulance, then circles back around to meet them, and was there when they put her on the trolley and put her in the back, dead as a doornail. He said the whole thing scared the life out of him. Said he couldn't stop thinking about what had that girl so scared over her little date up at Clandon. If he had to guess, he'd say something nasty was going on up there. Something that might make any potential jobs very, very messy. And we didn't do messy. We did fast, violent in and out jobs. We should have just called the whole thing off. But Phil had his mind made up about the place. And since he told the other lads that we might be able to retire on the proceeds, their minds were made up too. Then, when we got the news of the vault, it was go time. It had looked like we were just going for the jewelry and the antiques, but when some electrician gave up some info in exchange for a few $100, we had a definite target, and it was all hands to the pump. I used to work as a handyman assistant, and prepping for a home invasion was a lot like prepping for one of those jobs. You assemble the tools you need, sort out a van, make sure everyone knows the job. Then you drive out to the desired destination at the desired place and time. It's quiet too. Not like when you're shopping around for a clean shooter, thinking every second person is an undercover copper. I can just pop into B and Q, pick up a sledgehammer and zip ties, and I'll even get a smile from the checkout girl on the way out. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. The jobs, on the other hand, not so simple, and the one at Clandon Park was the hardest of the lot. The next twist came from when we found out that we'd be going in during the day. If you're thinking home invasion during daylight hours, you must be mad. I thought the exact same thing. I asked Phil if he banged his head or something, because the idea of hitting the place at bloody lunchtime was just barmy. Phil told me to trust him, that he'd done the recs or the scouting, and the place was heavy with security at night, whereas during the day there was a changeover of guard shifts at exactly 3 p.m. This is when the guards would be at their sloppiest, which gave us our time to strike. Phil reckoned that we could get in, have the lead fella open the vault for us, and be out again in exactly 12 minutes with millions in cash, jewelry, and whatever else they had hidden in that thing. I'll have to admit, hearing about the vault turned me right back onto the job. I'd been worried about the whole incident with that called girl in the car, but maybe that was just totally unrelated. Maybe the girl was as mad as a box of frogs and was always going to do something like that. Besides, it was all talk of one last job, and we'll be set for life. And in any of those little doubts in the back of your mind just dematerialized. I suppose I've kept you in suspense long enough at this point. I suppose you all just want to know what happened, what went wrong, why I went to prison, and why my life is now in the toilet. Well, it started with the vault. Everything was going perfectly to plan. They obviously didn't expect anyone to actually try and rob the place during the daytime. And the fact that we rolled up right as some gardener bloke turned up to trim the hedges made the help think that we were just part of his crew. She found out pretty quickly how that wasn't the case when Scene broke her collarbone with one swing of his hammer. We managed to grip the head security bloke. It was right where we wanted him to be during the shift changeover. And although he initially insisted that he couldn't get the vault open, threatening to scoop his eye out with the sharp end of a claw hammer soon had him remembering the code. We were expecting lockboxes full of priceless jewelry, maybe some gold bullion, painting, I don't know, rich people stuff. What we found is something unbelievable. I use the word unbelievable because out of all the people I've told, only one person has actually believed me to be telling the truth. But it is the truth. When I saw what it was when we opened that door, what we found was a mix between a prison and a hospital. It was completely sterile, with gowned up and masked up nurses screaming when they saw us walk in with our balaclavas and weapons. There was one main room that looked like a kind of lobby and 6 smaller cells jutting off from it. We figured that there might be something valuable in the cells, so we went to see what was in there. And I still remember Kev gasping when he saw that it was women. They had a woman locked up in each of these little rooms, and every single one of them was pregnant. The hospital staff, or the wardens, whoever they were, they ran off into another part of the hospital and sealed the door. I doubt we couldn't have gotten the door open, but we weren't really in the mood to try at that point. We realized that there had been a horrible mistake. Yes, there was obviously something valuable in here, but it wasn't anything we could launder or resell. I don't know what exactly was going on, but you just got this sense that something terrible was happening. And this was confirmed when one of the girls got up out of bed, waddled towards the cell door, which was made of some kind of clear plastic, and began banging on it. I haven't got a clue what language she was speaking. It sounded Eastern European, but God knows which one. We didn't need a translator, though. It was blindingly obvious that she wanted us to let her out, and it didn't take us long to find some way of letting her out, but it came with a price. To open up the cells, we had to set off the fire alarm, which meant we had to get out of there without grabbing so much as a crugerant. But not before Kev walked over to the room the nurses had locked themselves in. It had this little glass panel on it, so you could just see inside a bit, but not a lot. Right before we tripped the fire alarm, Kev walks over just to see if there's anything in there worth taking, and all we hear is, "Jesus Christ, boys, what in God's name is all that?" I remember walking over and peering through the little glass panel. The first thing I saw was all those terrified nurses, but behind them, and all these little see-through plastic pouches were babies. Not like actually full-grown kids. No, some of them didn't look all the way grown yet, but you could tell what they were. There was no mistaking it. We then put 2 and 2 together, all suddenly coming to the same rough conclusion as to what was happening in there. And that's when Phil flew into a rage. I knew it was stupid of him to try and rescue that pregnant girl. We were the bad guys. You don't do stuff like that when you're a bad guy. It gets you caught. It gets you killed. But what was I going to do? Make him leave her? Phil was about a foot taller than me. So generally speaking, whenever Phil wanted to do something, it got done. On the way out to the van, scene stopped near these big long curtains. Phil just about tore his head off asking him what in God's name he was thinking. But later, when he saw him pulling out a lighter and set fire to a dusty pair of drapes, he said he just smiled in approval. We piled into the van just before 4 in the afternoon, and I remember that clearly because of the little digi-clock on the dashboard. As Kev turned the van around, I saw smoke coming up from one of the windows, and I remember hoping the place burned to the ground. We drove so fast that I think we're almost back in London before we saw a fire engine zooming past us going the other way. And thankfully, That was the only time we saw blue flashing lights behind us. The pregnant girl apparently didn't know a bit of English and was crying and saying thank you. Thank you over and over again as we drove back. She didn't know much though, only enough to repeat the phrase Tottenham Court Road when we asked her where she lived. We dropped her off. All went our separate ways. Kev got rid of the van. And apparently, that was that. We never had a visit from the coppers with a big key. It took us ages for word of the fire to reach the airwaves. And for all intents and purposes, the raid never bloody happened in the first place. Only we couldn't forget about it. Or rather, Kev wouldn't let us. The prick wouldn't shut up about it, worrying about the girls, wanting to try to find the one we'd saved or call in some anonymous tip to the police. And I'm perfectly sure he did too. Calling a tip, I mean. He never told us he did, but I know because Kev was the first one to turn up dead. They said he topped himself, but anyone who knew Kev knew he wasn't like that. He didn't leave a note. Didn't tell anyone he was depressed or anything. Story 11. This happened a few years ago when I was a college student in Baltimore, Maryland. I found a nice third-floor apartment with 2 friends in a beautiful old building. Being young and naive, we'd often leave the door to our apartment unlocked while we were home, assuming the building's locking entrance door would do the trick. Of course, unless all the tenants made sure to close it entirely on their way out. That door could remain just ajar enough to not lock. Anyone who's lived in a not-so-great area of the city probably knows where this is going. It was really early in the morning, and my housemate had just left for work. I was fast asleep in bed. I'm a small person, and during the winter, I cocoon myself head to toe in a lot of thick comforters. Anyway, the first thing I remember is waking up super groggy to the sound of somebody in my room. It was pretty dark, but I could make out the tall, slim figure of a person who was sort of drifting around by the side of my bedroom. In my half-asleep state, I assumed that it was my housemate. We were close and would often borrow things, an umbrella, a pen, etc., from each other freely. So I figured they were just poking around for something. I promptly emerged from the blanket cocoon and asked in my infamous morning person, super cheerful voice, "Can I help you find anything, babe?" The figure turned and jumped about a foot in the air. I realized pretty quickly, with a sinking feeling, that it was not my housemate, but instead some tall man I'd never seen in my life. I then realized that he hadn't even known I was in the bedroom, room, or apartment at all. He muttered something, I think about how he thought this was his friend's apartment, and just kind of stared bewildered. I told him, "Oh no, sorry, this is my apartment." It was very surreal, and I don't think I'd fully realized at that point that I was being robbed. With that, he turned and pretty much bolted out through the living room. I learned about 10 minutes later that he grabbed my laptop on his way out. So at least he managed to find something. Suffice to say, lesson learned. We kept all doors to the place locked at all times from that day forward. My friends and I still laugh about it, but I can't help but think about how it could have been a much worse situation if A, it wasn't just some guy committing a crime of opportunity, and B, I hadn't scared him off with my skills as the world's most considerate home invasion hostess. I live.